There's a continent at the bottom of the world that nobody fully understands. It is covered in ice that is, in some places, nearly 3 miles thick. It holds about 90% of all the fresh water on Earth. And underneath all of that ice, there are things that scientists are only beginning to admit might be there. Structures, formations, anomalies that do not fit the standard story we were all taught in school. The story that says Antarctica was always frozen, always empty, always a dead place at the end of the world. That story has a problem. Several problems, actually. And once you start pulling on the threads, the whole picture changes completely. Let us start with a map. In 1513, a Turkish admiral named Piri Reis drew a map of the world. This map was not unusual for its time in most ways, but in one way it was absolutely extraordinary. It showed the coastline of Antarctica in detail, with geographic accuracy that stunned researchers when it was rediscovered in 1929 at the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. The problem is simple. Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820. That is over 300 years after Piri Reis drew his map. Even more disturbing, the map appears to show the coastline of Antarctica as it would look without ice, showing the subglacial terrain beneath the ice sheet. In 1953, United States Air Force Captain Lorenzo Burroughs wrote a letter to the Library of Congress confirming that the map showed geographic features that match perfectly with modern surveys done using ground-penetrating radar. Burroughs called it, quote, remarkable, which is one of the more modest ways you could describe a map that should not exist. Piri Reis himself wrote notes on the map, saying he used source maps that were ancient, maps that came from a library he had access to that contained geographical knowledge going back thousands of years. Some researchers believe those source maps were from the Library of Alexandria before it burned. Others believe they came from an even older tradition of maritime navigation that we have no official record of. What both possibilities share is the same implication. Someone mapped Antarctica before the ice, and that means someone was there. If you're watching this and you want to go deeper on any of this, subscribe right now and hit the notification bell because we are just getting started, and what comes next is going to shake everything you thought you knew. Now here is where the science stops being comfortable. In 2016, a team of researchers using satellite imaging technology detected what appeared to be large structures beneath the ice in East Antarctica, near the Transantarctic Mountains. The images showed geometric formations, regular angles, and what some analysts described as pyramid-shaped mountains. NASA responded quickly, saying these were natural formations caused by a geological process called pyramidal peak formation, where glacial erosion carves 4 triangular faces on a mountain. That is a real geological process. It happens in the Alps, it happens in other mountain ranges, but there were specific things about the Antarctic formations that made some researchers push back hard. The symmetry was too precise, the angles were too consistent, and there were 4 of them clustered in a region that had no other peaks of similar shape for hundreds of miles in any direction. Dr. Mitch Darcy, a geologist from the German Research Center for Geosciences, explained in 2016 that the formations were not necessarily artificial. His team acknowledged the visual similarity to man-made pyramids, but maintained a natural explanation. What he did not do, and what most mainstream scientists have not done, is actually excavate. Nobody has gone down through the ice to examine what is underneath these formations at their base. The technology exists. The funding does not seem to materialize. That absence of investigation is itself worth noting. In 2018, a different kind of discovery made headlines briefly before being buried under the usual avalanche of news. A research expedition from the University of Canterbury in New Zealand detected what appeared to be large subglacial lakes beneath the Ross Ice Shelf in Antarctica. These were not the first subglacial lakes ever found. Lake Vostok, discovered in the 1990s, sits under about 2.4 miles of ice and is roughly the size of Lake Ontario. What made the 2018 discovery interesting was the chemical composition of the water and the sediment layers found in drilling samples. The sediment contained microbial life and, more surprisingly, organic material that suggested the presence of vegetation dating back at least 34 million years. Antarctica, 34 million years ago, was warmer. Scientists have known this. What they have not fully resolved is whether civilization is even theoretically possible in that warmer window, and if so, what traces it might have left that would survive glaciation. Charles Hapgood was a history professor at Keene State College in New Hampshire who spent years developing a theory called Earth crustal displacement. His idea, published in his 1958 book, was that the outer crust of the Earth can shift as a single unit relative to the inner core, potentially moving entire continents thousands of miles over relatively short geological periods. Hapgood believed this explained how Antarctica might have been positioned farther from the South Pole in recent geological history, allowing for a temperate climate and possibly human habitation. His work was controversial. It still is. But here's something that rarely gets mentioned. Albert Einstein wrote the foreword to Hapgood's book. Einstein called the theory thought-provoking and said it deserved serious consideration from geophysicists. When Einstein endorses your theory, even cautiously, it is not nothing. The question of ancient habitation has also been approached from the linguistic and mythological direction. Ancient Greek geographers wrote about a southern continent they called Antichthon, the land opposite to us. Aristotle discussed it. Pythagoras described a spherical Earth with a southern landmass to balance the known northern one. This was theoretical reasoning, yes, but Plato went further. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 years before the Common Era, Plato described Atlantis as a civilization of extreme sophistication that was destroyed approximately 9,000 years before his own time. That would place its destruction around 11,500 years ago, very close to the end of the last ice age. Some researchers have placed Atlantis in Antarctica specifically, arguing that the geological and geographical descriptions in Plato's text match the subglacial topography of Antarctica more closely than any other location on Earth. Rand Flemath, a Canadian researcher who spent decades on this, published a detailed comparison in his 1995 book showing that specific geographic features Plato described, the size, the shape, the surrounding ocean, the presence of mountains on one side, all fit Antarctica's subglacial profile remarkably well. Again, this is contested, but it is not insane. It is a data point. In 2017, the internet exploded briefly over satellite images that appeared to show a massive structure protruding from the ice in the Ellsworth Mountains of West Antarctica. The images showed what looked like a rectangular form approximately 400 feet across and partially buried in ice. Researchers from several institutions looked at the images. The consensus explanation was that it was a naturally occurring mesa, a flat-topped geological formation. But a retired United States Navy officer who has spoken under condition of anonymity in multiple documentary interviews has stated that flight restrictions over certain parts of Antarctica have been in place since the 1960s, not publicly explained, not tied to any specific scientific program, and enforced with enough seriousness that pilots who violated them were debriefed and in some cases had their records sealed. We are at the midpoint of this story, and the questions are only getting bigger. If you have not subscribed yet, do it right now, because the final section of this video goes into the specific findings from 2023 that the mainstream media covered for exactly 48 hours before going completely silent. Operation High Jump is one of the most documented and least discussed military operations in American history. In 1946 and 1947, Rear Admiral Richard Byrd led a United States Navy operation to Antarctica, involving over 4,700 military personnel, 13 ships, and 33 aircraft. The stated purpose was scientific research. The operation was heavily funded, heavily staffed, and ended abruptly after approximately 8 weeks. The original plan had been for 6 to 8 months. Byrd returned and gave an interview to a Chilean newspaper, El Mercurio, in which he warned of the possibility of a new war involving flying objects that could fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds. The interview was published on March 5, 1947. In the United States, it received almost no coverage. Byrd was later debriefed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The records of that debriefing remain classified. What happened in Antarctica that ended the mission early? No official explanation has ever been given. The Navy cited logistics and weather. Byrd's own diary entries from the mission, portions of which were published after his death, described discoveries that were carefully worded but clearly pointed towards something unexpected. In 1955, Byrd returned to Antarctica for Operation Deep Freeze, which established permanent American research stations on the continent, including McMurdo Station, which still operates today. Byrd died in 1957. His full personal logs from both operations have never been released. The secrecy argument gets stronger when you look at the Antarctic Treaty of 1959. Signed on December 1st of that year by 12 nations, the treaty designated Antarctica as a scientific preserve and banned military activity on the continent. It also included provisions about information sharing that, in practice, have meant that much of what gets discovered in Antarctica is filtered through national research programs before it reaches the public. In 2004, a Freedom of Information Act request filed by researcher Linda Moulton Howe produced documents showing that the United States Geological Survey had conducted extensive ground-penetrating radar surveys in areas of Antarctica near the Pensacola Mountains and had found anomalies they described as requiring further study. The further study was funded. The results were not published in any public scientific journal. In 2012, Russian scientists drilling into Lake Vostok finally broke through the ice ceiling after more than 20 years of drilling. They reached the lake water at a depth of approximately 2.4 miles. What they found generated enormous scientific interest. Microbial life that was genetically unlike anything cataloged before. One scientist involved in the project, Dr. Sergei Bulat of the Petersburg Nuclear Physics Institute, stated that the bacterial strain found in the lake samples did not match any known life form in the worldwide database. He called it an unclassified and unidentified organism. That statement was made in 2013. Since then, the public scientific conversation about Lake Vostok has gone very quiet. Research continues. Papers are published about temperature gradients and salinity levels. The question of what exactly was living in that water has been treated with unusual institutional caution. In 2017, a team of researchers from the University of Kansas published findings in the journal Geophysical Research Letters, confirming the existence of a massive subglacial heat source beneath Marie Byrd Land in West Antarctica. The heat source was described as a mantle plume, a column of hot rock rising from deep within the Earth. The heat output was estimated at between 150 and 180 milliwatts per square meter, which is extraordinarily high. For comparison, Yellowstone National Park, one of the most geologically active regions in North America, outputs about 200 milliwatts per square meter. And what this means, practically, is that there is a region of Antarctica being warmed from below. The ice above it is melting. And beneath that melting ice, there is liquid water, potentially a lot of it. And wherever there is liquid water and geothermal heat, the conditions for life and for the preservation of structures change dramatically. This brings us to 2023. In January of that year, a research consortium involving the British Antarctic Survey, the Alfred Wegener Institute of Germany, and 2 American universities published data from a new deep mapping survey of the subglacial terrain across a region of Central East Antarctica. The survey used a new generation of ground-penetrating radar mounted on aircraft that could resolve details far smaller than previous technology allowed. What they found was a network of subglacial channels and basins that had, in the words of the published paper, characteristics suggesting sustained liquid water flow over geological timescales. The paper focused on the geological and hydrological implications. But attached to the raw data package released alongside the paper were images that were almost immediately flagged by independent researchers. The images showed, in several locations, what appeared to be regular geometric features at the bedrock level beneath the ice. Features with straight edges, features with consistent angular relationships to each other, features that did not match the surrounding terrain geology. The raw data was available for approximately 72 hours before access was restricted to credentialed researchers. Screenshots circulated. The British Antarctic Survey issued a statement saying the features were being analyzed and that no conclusions should be drawn from preliminary data. No follow-up statement has been issued as of the time this script was written. The lead researcher on the project, Dr. Catherine Ritz of the Institut des Géosciences de l'Environnement in Grenoble, France, has not given any public interviews about the anomalous features since the initial data release. What gets almost no coverage is the testimony of workers who have served at Antarctic research stations. McMurdo Station alone has hosted thousands of support workers over the decades, people hired through contractors to do logistics, maintenance, and infrastructure work. Some of these workers, speaking in online forums, in documentary interviews, and in published accounts, have described being restricted from certain areas of the ice shelf for reasons that were never explained to them. One account, from a worker who served at McMurdo in 2009, described being redirected by helicopter away from a site near the Transantarctic Mountains after their vehicle broke down, and they began walking toward what appeared to be a structure on the ice approximately 2 miles from their position. The site they were redirected away from does not appear on any publicly available map of research stations or installations in that region. The continent keeps more secrets per square mile than anywhere else on Earth. It is the most remote, the most inhospitable, and the most controlled landmass in human history. Every government that has territorial claims or research presence there has signed agreements to share findings. Almost none of them share everything. The ice itself is a compression of time. Each layer holds a record of the atmosphere, the temperature, the chemical composition of everything that was in the air when that layer was deposited. Ice cores drilled from Antarctica have given us climate records going back 800,000 years. They have also, in deeper cores, shown chemical signatures that some researchers argue point to catastrophic events that do not fit the standard model of gradual geological change. Events that happened fast. Events that buried whatever was on the surface quickly and completely. The Peary race map does not go away. The Lake Vostok organism does not go away. The classified bird debriefing does not go away. The restricted 2023 data does not go away. What changes is who is willing to put those things in the same sentence and take the implications seriously. The scientific establishment has institutional reasons to move slowly and carefully, and those reasons are legitimate, but they are not the only reasons things move slowly. Antarctica covers 14 million square kilometers. As of today, less than 1% of its bedrock has been directly examined. The ice above that bedrock in many locations has not been drilled through. The features detected by radar remain features detected by radar, shapes without names, without context, without the kind of ground truth examination that would settle the question permanently. The machines that could do that examination exist. The political will to deploy them in the places that matter most has not materialized. In 1956, Admiral Byrd described Antarctica as the most important discovery in the history of the world. He said that in a radio interview. He never explained what he meant.